I said, "Stay down, old man." The words cracked through the city air like a whip, loud, sharp, cruel. Spit flew from the boy's lips as he stood over the crumpled figure on the sidewalk, fists clenched, chest heaving. His hoodie hung loose over a wiry frame, his breath quick, fueled more by pride than adrenaline. For a moment, the world stilled around him. Harold Harry McLean, 82, didn't respond, not with words. He was already half risen, one knee braced against the pavement, one hand pushing hard against the cold concrete. His cane, a simple worn piece of wood with initials carved at the base, lay a few feet away, forgotten for now. So did his cap, its faded Marine Corps emblem stained with fresh coffee from the cup that had slipped from his other hand. His face was pale, jaw rigid, eyes locked on the horizon. He didn't look at the boy. He didn't need to. He knew that kind of anger. He'd seen it before, in barracks, in enemy eyes, in his own mirror, but never like this. Not here, not from a child. People were watching. None of them moved. Someone's briefcase had fallen nearby, its papers still catching the breeze. A delivery bike slowed, then kept going. A woman in a red coat had her phone halfway out of her pocket, but never pressed record. And the boy? He stood taller now, feeding off the silence like it was approval. He spat at the sidewalk and muttered, "He was in my way." The coffee trickled slowly toward the gutter. Harry finally drew in a breath, short, shallow, controlled. He pulled his hand closer, dragging his weight up inch by inch, muscles taut, not from age alone, but from the stubborn refusal to give anyone the satisfaction of watching him stay down. Then, movement. A figure turned the corner at the far end of the block, quick, sharp, straight-backed. The uniform was unmistakable, dark blue pressed to perfection, silver buttons catching the morning light. A Marine, active duty. The walk said it all. Not rushed, but purposeful, precise. He had seen it, all of it. And the way his gaze locked on the boy towering over the older man, that was no stranger. That was a son, and everything was about to change. If you believe every veteran deserves respect, please subscribe, because every view helps this message reach those who need it most. 10 minutes earlier, the morning air held a quiet chill, not yet winter, but cold enough to remind the bones what year it was. Harry McLean stepped out from the wide stone doorway of the courthouse, pulling his jacket tight with one hand, the other gripping his cane like a third leg. The sun filtered between buildings, casting long streaks of light across the sidewalk. He paused on the first step and took a breath. It smelled like brick dust and fresh paper. The courthouse always did. He liked that. It meant the system, for all its flaws, still filed something, still stood. He adjusted his cap, the faded Marine insignia barely visible under years of weather and wear, and began his slow descent to the street below. The world moved around him in fast forward. People in suits checking watches, delivery vans honking for space, the clatter of wheels and heels bouncing off buildings. Harry's pace never changed. He walked like someone used to doing things right, not fast. Each step deliberate, the cane meeting the sidewalk with a soft, familiar click. At the corner was a small cast-iron bench, black paint chipped from the arms. One screw loose on the backrest. To most, it was just a bench. To Harry, it was more. He had sat there every Thursday morning since the spring of 2005, always after filing a letter, signing a petition, or dropping off a quiet recommendation on behalf of another vet. Always alone. That bench had been his captain's favorite spot, long ago. Before the cancer, before the world moved on, Harry sat there to remember. Not just the man, the way he laughed, the way he shouted orders during a monsoon in Busan, the way he wept, only once, when writing a final letter for a kid from Indiana whose mother would never know how brave he really was. Harry's boots were not regulation anymore, soft-soled, with orthopedic insoles, but they still carried him, one careful step at a time, toward the only appointment he never skipped. A courthouse clerk named Daniel usually joined him. They'd share a coffee, talk about old times, pretend the city hadn't changed as much as it had. Daniel wasn't there yet, but something else was. As Harry approached the bench, he saw the slouch of shoulders first, hoodies, sneakers propped on the armrest. There were 3 of them, teenagers, loud, bright-eyed, tethered to their screens. One scrolled, another laughed too loud at something unseen, and the third, the tallest, kicked a backpack against the bench's leg. Harry didn't frown. He didn't sigh. He simply kept walking, stopping 3 feet from the bench. He gave a polite nod, the kind that had once meant, "Excuse me," without needing to say it. The kind older men still used in hardware stores and cemetery gates. One of the boys looked up, confused. "Dude, what's he even doing here?" Harry raised his hand slowly, pointing 2 fingers toward the empty space at the edge of the bench. Just enough room for one. He didn't expect a warm welcome, but a small shift, a little space, that would have been enough. The tall boy scoffed, shifted, then kicked his foot up higher, letting it dangle just where Harry had pointed. The others smirked. One whispered something. Harry didn't catch the words, but he heard the tone, the easy mockery of those too young to know what they were disrespecting. Harry didn't speak. Instead, he reached into his coat, pulled out a folded napkin, the kind you get at a coffee cart, and began slowly wiping off the bench rail where the boy's shoe had left a smear. The teens fell quiet, watching. For a moment, something like shame flickered. Then it passed. "He lost or something?" one asked. "Is he like confused?" "You can sit somewhere else, Gramps." Harry turned away and stood beside the bench, straightening his back just slightly. It hurt, but he stood taller anyway. For a moment, a soft memory drifted through him. The scent of diesel, the muffled sound of dog tags rattling against a chest plate, a captain's voice shouting over static. "We don't sit till the mission's done." He would not beg for a place to rest. Not from children. Not from anyone. One of the boys mimed a stiff salute behind Harry's back. The others chuckled. A passing jogger noticed, slowed, then kept running. The city moved on, but Harry stood. The breeze tugged at the hem of his jacket. A paper cup tumbled down the sidewalk. His knuckles tightened around the cane. The bench, his bench, was right there, but it wasn't the bench he missed. Not really. It was the men, the silence they shared, the weight they carried so no one else had to. And in that moment, standing tall in front of a seat he could no longer claim, he felt something tighten in his chest. Not pain, not anger, just a quiet ache, a familiar one. Harry's right hand gripped the cane tighter, but he didn't lean on it yet. He stood like a man waiting for permission that shouldn't need asking, beside the bench that had always been his. The boys hadn't said another word, but the silence between them was louder than speech. The tallest one shifted his weight and cracked his knuckles. It was a casual motion, one that said, "I could, but I won't." The way young men test space when they don't realize the ground they're standing on is sacred. His friend whispered something with a smirk. The third boy laughed, just once, short and mean. The sidewalk beneath Harry's shoes felt harder than usual. His soles were worn. Not from neglect, he cleaned them every week, but from miles walked out of duty, not comfort. His toes curled just slightly in his boots. Balance was still good, but not perfect. And balance matters when dignity is all you have left to hold. He didn't speak, didn't glance at them again. He simply reached into his coat, drew out a small hand-folded packet of sugar, and shook it in his palm. A ritual. He did it every Thursday before his coffee arrived. 1 tap to settle the grains. 2 for the memory of someone else who used to sit beside him. That's when it happened. The rubber tip of the cane slipped, just a few inches forward, but it was enough. The sidewalk was uneven, a crack running beneath his foot. He shifted too late. His shoulder dipped, his balance went, and suddenly, he was falling. It wasn't a dramatic fall, not loud, not theatrical, just a quiet, heavy descent. A man with too much pride to flail. The sound of bone and fabric meeting concrete was muffled by the chatter of a nearby crosswalk and a bus engine down the street. But to those standing nearest, the boys, the couple at the cafe window, the woman in the red coat, it was unmistakable. One of the boys burst out laughing. Too loud, too fast. "Damn, man, you gonna fall over just standing still?" The tallest boy turned fully toward Harry now. He looked down at the older man sprawled on the pavement, hat knocked aside, hands braced behind him. For a moment, there was a pause, maybe a flicker of hesitation. Then, with a cruel grin, he stepped forward. He didn't help him up. He shoved him, not hard, not with both hands, just one palm against Harry's shoulder. Enough to say, "You don't belong here." Harry hit the ground again, harder this time. A sharp exhale escaped his chest, but no cry, no complaint, just a grunt of air cut short. Gasps rippled from nearby onlookers, but no one moved. The woman in the red coat took a half step forward. Her lips parted, her brows pulled tight in worry. She opened her mouth. "Hey," she began. The teen snapped his head toward her. "You want some too?" She stopped. Her mouth closed, her hand lowered. She turned and walked away, faster than before. Harry blinked slowly, then reached for his cane. It had rolled beyond his reach. He stretched, wincing, palm scraping pavement. A man in a business suit stood 10 feet away, holding a paper cup of coffee. His eyes darted toward the boy, then back to Harry. He looked down at his watch, then across the street, as if searching for an excuse. And he found one. He turned, walked, coffee steaming behind him. The third boy raised his phone. A low chime. Recording started. The tallest one grinned wider now, standing with feet planted, hands loose at his sides. "Still want your bench, Grandpa?" Harry's chest rose and fell once. Deep, controlled. His eyes fixed forward, not on the boy, not on the phone, on the bench. Always the bench. He started to move again. One elbow bent, one knee lifted. The sound of his breath was barely louder than the city noise, but those close enough could hear it. The breath of a man refusing to be broken. A micro flash from long ago passed behind his eyes. A night in the jungle, wet uniform clinging to his back, bullets chewing through trees. He'd been thrown from a truck that night. Dislocated shoulder, broken toe. Still crawled half a mile to radio in the casualty count. Still signed his name before the morphine kicked in. And now, 50 years later, on an American sidewalk, 3 kids laughed at his pain. A car alarm chirped in the distance. A delivery driver cursed at traffic. Life, as always, kept moving. But Harry stayed where he was, rising slowly, inch by inch. Not out of pride, not to prove something, but because he never quit. And still, the bench waited, empty, mocked, but unclaimed. Harry's left knee groaned beneath him as he finally made it to one leg. His hand, flat against the sidewalk, trembled, not from fear, not from exhaustion, but from the strain of containing something heavier than age. His fingers curled inward, pressing against the cold concrete as if to steady the earth itself. He made no sound, no grunt, no curse, only breath, steady, measured, the kind a man learns to control when pain is a companion, not a surprise. His other knee followed, slow and stubborn, then the cane. He dragged it closer with the toe of his boot, hooking it in and sliding it toward him, never once asking for help. The tip of the cane clicked once as it landed in his grip, that same rhythm he'd used on jungle trails and desert roads. Steady, functional, final. The teen stepped back, arms crossed, eyes narrowing. There was no satisfaction in his face now, no laughter, just a flicker of something else, something he didn't understand yet. Uncertainty. Harry planted the cane. It wobbled slightly. He adjusted, shifting his weight, and rose, inch by inch, until he stood once more. His shoulders didn't square. His chest didn't puff out. He simply stood, like a flag in wind. His jacket was scuffed now. One sleeve pulled half up his arm. His cap lay to the side, partially crushed. He reached for it, slowly, and brushed the dirt from its brim. Then, carefully, deliberately, He placed it back on his head, a Marine once more. He turned, not to the boys, not to the crowd, but to the bench. It was still there, the paint chipped, the screws rusted. The small iron curve in the middle back rail, the one his captain used to rest his arm across, caught the light just so. It gleamed for a second, then faded again. Harry moved toward it. Each step was deliberate. The cane clicked, the shoes slid. The posture remained unchanged. There was something almost holy about the silence that surrounded him now. Not reverent, not honored, but watchful. The city had not stopped, but something else had. The moment, the feeling. He reached the edge of the bench. The teens hadn't moved. Harry didn't speak. He didn't gesture. He didn't ask. He merely reached into his coat, withdrew a handkerchief, not a tissue but white cotton, ironed flat, edges stitched. He unfolded it once, then again, and began wiping the bench rail with slow, careful strokes. One of the boys shifted uneasily. The tall one glanced at his phone, suddenly unsure what to do with it. Harry's movements were methodical, the same way he had cleaned his rifle 40 years ago, sitting on the edge of a cot while a younger Marine wept behind a tent wall. The same way he had folded a flag at his friend's burial, tucking the corners tight, even as tears blurred the final salute. He finished cleaning the rail, folded the handkerchief again, slipped it into his coat, and still, he didn't sit. Instead, he reached into his breast pocket and pulled out a small paper packet of sugar, the same one from before. It had split slightly when he fell, a tiny stream of white now dusting his palm. He looked at it for a long moment. Then, he let the wind take it. A memory came, uninvited. His captain at a field hospital, laughing with morphine in his veins, whispering, "When I'm gone, Harry, don't sit too long. It's bad for the knees." He didn't smile at the thought, just nodded once, like an order had been confirmed from long ago. And for a moment, Harry simply stood, beside the bench he couldn't claim, facing the city that didn't remember his name, shoulders square with ghosts no one else could see. But someone was watching now, not just the teens, not just the bystanders frozen in awkward silence. From across the intersection, moving through the early traffic, a man in uniform stepped lightly onto the crosswalk. He wasn't running, he wasn't shouting, but his boots hit the pavement with purpose. His eyes were fixed on the old man beside the bench. His spine was straight, his jaw set. Harry hadn't seen him yet, but the air had changed. The wind shifted, the street hushed, and for the first time all morning, even the tallest boy said nothing at all. The crosswalk clicked green, and Nathan McLean stepped into the street. His boots, dark leather freshly brushed, struck the pavement with silent confidence. He walked like someone who knew exactly where to place his weight, how to carry himself without wasting motion. The sharp creases in his trousers held shape with every step. A single row of ribbons adorned his chest. Not boastful, but earned. He saw everything in a blink. The old man beside the bench, his back straight but battered. The crushed coffee cup. The boys, half silent now, unsure. The onlookers frozen mid-breath. The silence. That eerie, heavy silence. The kind that sits on your shoulders when something sacred has just been violated. Nathan's face was unreadable. Not stern, not furious. Composed. His gaze never wavered as he moved toward the sidewalk, and yet each breath beneath his ribs struck like a hammer. He had not seen his father in nearly 4 years. The last time they spoke, it was through a phone line soaked in static and stubborn pride. Words had been exchanged that couldn't be unsaid, the kind that only happened between two men too alike to yield. Then the silence, then the distance. But now, Harry stood right there. Same coat, same posture, same quiet fire behind the eyes. Older, yes. More stooped around the edges, but unchanged in the ways that mattered. And he was hurt, standing alone, humiliated. Nathan reached the curb. He didn't pause. He crossed onto the sidewalk like it was a battlefield. No hurry, no hesitation. Each step declared something unspoken. A line had been crossed. A reckoning had arrived. The tallest boy saw him first. His brow furrowed, then smoothed. For a moment he straightened his stance, puffing out his chest like he might need to defend himself. Then he noticed the uniform, and his throat bobbed as he swallowed whatever swagger was left. The crowd sensed it too. A hush even deeper than before began to settle. A man at the hot dog cart turned down the radio. A city worker paused with her broom mid-sweep. The woman in the red coat, the one who had turned away earlier, looked back now, then stepped a little closer. Nathan didn't speak right away. He passed the boys without even looking at them. His eyes were on the cane, on the scraped knuckles, on the streak of dust down the side of the old field jacket, on the small white specks of sugar that still clung to the fabric like frost. He stopped in front of his father, a single pace away, not close enough to touch, close enough to matter. For a long moment, neither man said anything. Harry glanced up, eyes narrowing, confusion flickering beneath the lines on his face. Recognition took a heartbeat longer. Then his chin lifted a fraction, not in greeting, in resistance. Nathan saw it, felt it, and for a second, the old arguments flickered between them like smoke over a dying campfire. But the moment passed. The past was not what mattered now. The present was bleeding. His voice, when it came, was low and unshaken. "You've got 5 seconds to back away." The words weren't shouted. They didn't need to be. They landed like the report of a bolt pulled clean on a rifle, unmistakable, controlled, and final. The tall teen took a step back before his mind had fully caught up. "Who the hell?" Nathan turned his head just slightly. That was enough. His stare silenced the boy mid-sentence. The others shifted. One lowered his phone without realizing. The screen went dark. Nathan stepped forward, breaking the space between them, and gently took hold of Harry's elbow. The old man flinched, not from fear but from the surprise of it. He helped him upright, not like a rescuer, like a Marine helping another to his feet after a hard drill. "You're not touching him again." There was no threat in his tone, only truth. A gust of wind passed through the corridor between buildings, rustling newspaper and lifting dust from the gutter. The bench creaked softly in the silence. Someone somewhere cleared their throat. Nathan adjusted his father's cap, not with tenderness, with respect. Harry didn't speak, but something shifted in his posture. Not forgiveness, not trust, recognition. For the first time in years, his son stood at his side, not as a boy, not as a rebel, not as a disappointment, as a Marine, and as a man. And the boy who had knocked him down now stood still, facing something no screen could capture. Not a punishment, but the unbearable weight of being seen by someone who would not look away. Nathan moved without command, without permission. His actions were deliberate, as if following orders spoken long ago, ones only he could hear. He turned, placed Harry's cane carefully beside the bench, and retrieved the cap from the sidewalk once more, brushing away a speck of dust. Then, without a word, he removed his own. The dark blue cap, adorned with the United States Marine Corps emblem, came off in one slow, fluid motion. He tucked it under his arm. The gesture was simple, but something about it drew the air tighter, the kind of stillness that happens in a courtroom before a verdict. In a funeral procession, before the final salute, he stepped beside his father, exactly 1 pace to the right, close, but not crowding, not offering protection, standing with him, not over him. Then, he stood at attention. His heels clicked together with a subtle firmness, hands at his sides, chin level, eyes forward. And just like that, the sidewalk changed. The laughter was gone. The boys didn't speak. No phones were raised now. The tallest one shifted his weight from one foot to the other, casting a glance toward the edge of the crowd. But there was nowhere to run. Not from this. The crowd wasn't loud. They weren't shocked. They were quiet. The kind of silence that happens when something real unfolds in front of them. Something they don't see every day. Veteran respect wasn't being demanded. It was simply present. Harry didn't look at his son, but he knew. He felt the warmth of shared gravity. That rare bond between those who have carried something heavy and said nothing about it for years. He didn't smile. He didn't nod. He just shifted his stance, ever so slightly, his own version of standing taller. The woman in the red coat lowered her phone and placed it gently in her purse. A man who had been sipping coffee across the street paused mid-sip, holding the cup just beneath his mouth. A bus pulled to a stop, idling, but no one stepped off. The world, for a moment, watched two men stand still. The tall teen looked down at his hands. They had stopped trembling, not from fear, but from confusion. He couldn't process what was happening. This wasn't how things usually played out. He had expected yelling, threats, maybe a cop, maybe a scolding from a teacher voice. But not this. Not a man in uniform, silent as stone, standing beside the person he had just knocked to the ground. Nathan's back was perfectly straight. His hands remained still. No shaking, no flinching. But behind his eyes, everything was burning. The years of silence, the words unspoken, the gap between him and his father that had seemed so wide for so long, now narrowed by a single wordless stand. He was not just defending a parent. He was standing with a forgotten hero. And in that stand, something sacred was being restored. A small sound broke the tension, the hush of someone clapping, just once, then again. It came from the far end of the sidewalk, where an elderly man in a Veterans of Foreign Wars hat had stopped his walker and lifted one hand, slowly clapping with a face full of ache and pride. Another joined him, then another. Not thunderous applause, just a soft ripple. Respect, not performance. The teens didn't speak. One of them reached for his phone again but stopped. Not from fear, but from the weight of shame that comes not when you're punished, but when you're shown what dignity looks like. Harry's hand hovered near the bench rail. He didn't sit. Instead, he reached into his coat and withdrew that same folded napkin from earlier, once used to clean a smudge of disrespect, now held gently in one hand, like a flag not meant to fly today. Nathan, still at attention, didn't move. He didn't need to. The message had been delivered. And in that stillness, under the watching eyes of a quiet crowd, father and son stood, two generations of Marines, divided by time, rejoined by respect. For the first time that morning, Harry's breath came easy. Harry didn't move right away. His knuckles rested lightly against the top of the cane, his thumb circling the carved initials at the base. A habit, nothing more. But something in his breathing had changed. It was steadier now. Not because the tension was gone, but because he was no longer holding the weight alone. Beside him, Nathan remained still. At attention, posture unbroken, eyes forward. But a shift had happened inside him too. So quiet it wouldn't have shown on his face, but deep enough that his spine felt it. He wasn't standing as a soldier now. He was standing as a son. For the first time in years, he understood something he'd never admitted. His father hadn't been hard. He'd been heavy, carrying the grief of others, the memory of those who never came home, and the guilt that he had. The crowd hadn't left, but they weren't intruding either. There was a kind of reverence now, the way people feel in the quiet part of a chapel or during the lowering of a flag. No one took photos. No one whispered. Even the street sounds, the hum of tires, the rumble of a distant truck, seemed softened somehow. Harry finally turned his head, just slightly, enough to look at the man beside him. He didn't smile, didn't nod, just looked. Nathan didn't look back, not right away, but he felt it, the look, the weight of it, the unspoken question inside it. Not, "Why are you here?" but, "Are you staying?" The silence stretched, not awkward but full, a language both men knew but rarely used. A woman from the courthouse stepped forward, gently cradling 2 coffee cups in a cardboard tray. She held them like an offering, hesitant at first, but certain by the time she reached them. She didn't speak either. She simply extended one toward Harry with a small, respectful dip of the head. He accepted it with both hands. Her eyes flicked to Nathan, then back again. something kind flickering there. And then she turned and walked away without another word. The first sip was shallow, warm, too sweet. Daniel always brought it with sugar, but Harry didn't mind. The taste hit something in the back of his throat that reminded him of barracks coffee, tin cup, rain tapping on canvas, a laugh shared between men who knew they might die before morning and yet found a way to grin. Nathan shifted his feet, not to move, just to ease the muscles. Standing still for that long demanded more strength than some would guess. He broke attention slowly and relaxed his posture, but didn't step away. He stayed where he was, present. Their eyes met, just for a moment. Not long, but long enough. And in that shared glance, something passed between them. Not forgiveness, not yet, but understanding. The kind only found between two men who have fought different wars, but carried the same armor. Behind them, the bench stood empty. For the first time, the teens saw it not as a place to sprawl or joke, but as a kind of marker. A position of honor they had defiled without knowing. A city worker, broom in hand, approached quietly. She didn't say anything, just swept the spilled sugar and paper fragments into her dustpan and gave a small nod to Harry as she passed. It wasn't penance. It was respect. Harry looked at the bench, the place he had guarded in silence for years, not for comfort, but for memory. He had sat there every Thursday not because it was easy, but because it was sacred, because it reminded him who he had been, who he still was. Nathan stepped forward, just half a step. Harry didn't stop him. Instead, he turned and walked beside his son. Together, they stood in front of the bench now. Two shadows stretched long in the autumn sun, side by side, decades apart, bound not by words, but by what they had endured and never spoken. The bench stood before them, silent and unremarkable, just iron, wood, and paint peeling from years of rain and sun. But in that moment, it held the weight of history. Not the kind you find in textbooks, but the kind buried deep in the chest of a man who came home and said nothing. Nathan looked at it with new eyes. He had walked past this bench before, years ago, before his deployments, before the silence with his father widened into a canyon. He'd never thought twice about it. Just a piece of city furniture. Somewhere old men sat and watched pigeons. He never knew his father had made it a ritual. The crowd had thinned slightly, but those who remained were watching closely. No one was talking now, just listening, waiting. There was a pressure in the air, the kind you feel before a story you didn't know you needed to hear. A voice broke the silence. It wasn't Harry's, it was Nathan's. Korea, Battle of Outpost Harry, June 1953. He said it flat, like reading from a ledger, but the words landed heavy. He was 19, a lance corporal, walked in with a company, left with half. Someone in the crowd drew a breath and held it. The name Outpost. Harry meant nothing to most people, just another forgotten hill. But to a few, the right few, it echoed. Harry didn't correct him, didn't nod, but he turned slightly, just enough to show he was listening. Wounded twice, Nathan continued. Shrapnel in the leg. Shoulder dislocated in a night assault. No evacuation, no relief. They called it the death post behind closed doors. He stayed the full 8 days. A low whistle came from the edge of the sidewalk. Unintentional, respectful. Another voice, a man near the stop sign, murmured, "He was there?" Nathan glanced toward him, then back to his father. He never told anyone, not even me. That line landed harder than the rest. The crowd now saw something different. Not just an old man who had fallen, but a man who had never once asked for applause. A man who had been carrying ghosts in silence, while the world passed by with earbuds and schedules and quick judgments. Nathan motioned slightly toward the bench. He came here every Thursday, since 2005, to sit where his captain used to sit before the cancer took him. The same captain who gave the order that saved a platoon. The same one who bled out waiting for medics that never came. Harry said nothing, but his hand drifted to the cane again. thumb finding the carved initials at the bottom. A.C. Captain Arthur Collins. That cane had been his, passed down, a quiet inheritance. Nathan finished the story without flourish. He doesn't come here for coffee or comfort. He comes here to remember, to keep one promise alive when the rest of the world forgot who he was. And with that, the truth settled over the crowd. No applause followed, no words, just stillness. Even the boys, especially the tallest one, had stopped looking at their phones. Now their eyes were on Harry, and they could not look away. Not because they feared him, but because for the first time in their young lives, they recognized what respect feels like when it finally arrives. The bench no longer looked empty. It looked sacred. It hadn't moved. No one had touched it. But everything around it had changed. The scuffs on the paint were no longer blemishes. They were patina, proof that it had endured, just like the man who had returned to it every week for 2 decades. The hush remained, not heavy, not awkward, but reverent. Even the breeze had slowed. Leaves that once skittered across the sidewalk now drifted gently, as if unwilling to break the silence. From the courthouse doors, a woman in a gray blazer stepped out. Her heels clicked with quiet purpose as she crossed the landing. Her name was Lisa Hammond, courthouse administrator. 31 years in the building. She had seen Harry more times than she could count, and never once had she asked him why he came, until now. She descended the steps, stopped at the base, and looked at him. She didn't smile, didn't soften. Her eyes were damp, but her voice was steady. That bench, it's his now. It wasn't a proclamation. It wasn't a gift. It was a recognition, a reordering of space, a small act of justice that didn't need a gavel. A maintenance man nearby glanced up from his bucket and nodded. He didn't need to be told. He was already moving. He returned minutes later with a small brass plaque, thin and rectangular. Nothing grand, just enough. He knelt, quietly, and screwed it into the center back rail of the bench. No speech, no ceremony, just the light screech of metal against wood and the sound of 4 tiny screws doing something permanent. The plaque read, "Reserved for veterans, especially the ones we forget." Someone across the sidewalk whispered, "Amen." The boys hadn't left. The tall one, the one who had pushed Harry down not 15 minutes before, stood now with his hands in his jacket pockets, head low. His face wasn't red, it was pale, the color of shame that seeps in when silence teaches what shouting never could. From behind him, a middle-aged woman stepped forward. She wore a courthouse ID clipped to her sweater, and her voice was gentle but firm. "You come back tomorrow," she said to the boy. "He'll be here. You can apologize then." The boy didn't argue. He nodded. Just once. The kind of nod that boys give when they're learning how to become men. Harry hadn't spoken since the fall, but now he sat, slowly, with care, with purpose, not to rest, but to reclaim. Nathan stood beside him still, cap tucked under one arm, posture easy now, no longer at attention, but still present, still with him. A man in line at the nearby coffee cart took off his hat. A young woman with her daughter crossed the street just to offer Harry a small paper cup. Others began to move with purpose, not to help, not to fix, but to honor, to be near. It wasn't a celebration, it was a correction. And in that small correction, a bench became a symbol, not of charity, but of promise kept. And in a world where forgotten heroes pass quietly, hoping someone will remember, today, someone did. 1 week later, the same morning light filtered across the courthouse steps. The sidewalk had already begun to dry from the early dew. The bench stood exactly where it always had, but now it had weight, meaning. The small brass plaque gleamed against the black iron rail, polished by someone's hand before sunrise. Harry arrived precisely at 9. Same coat, same slow walk. This time, no hesitation. A quiet nod to the court officer at the door. A smaller nod to the clerk setting up the sandwich board. These gestures had always been part of his routine, unnoticed before, now returned in kind. People nodded back, not with pity, with respect. He sat with care, as always. The bench welcomed him. His cane rested against the side rail, angled precisely so it wouldn't fall. His cap stayed on this time. A small but clear decision. He was not mourning today. He was present. From the other end of the sidewalk, footsteps approached. A familiar rhythm, sharp, measured. Nathan. He carried 2 coffees, one in each hand, steam rising gently in the morning air. His dress blues were exchanged for a plain olive coat, but he still walked like someone who had not forgotten his training. He stopped beside the bench and extended a cup without a word. Harry took it. Their hands did not touch, but the distance between them had changed. It no longer held history. It held understanding. Nathan sat beside him. A few moments passed in silence. Then a young man, maybe 20, approached from the edge of the sidewalk. Hoodie zipped, eyes low. It was the teen from the week before. He didn't speak, just stood there, shoulders tight, fists in his pockets. Then he extended a folded piece of paper with both hands. Harry took it slowly, unfolded it once, then again. 7 words written in careful, unsure script. I didn't know. I'm sorry. I see now. Harry nodded. That was enough. No lecture, no performance. Just the space for a beginning. The boy turned and walked away. Slower this time, straighter. Not proud, aware. From across the street, 2 young veterans approached. Beards, backpacks, fatigue in their eyes. They had heard about the bench. One sat on the far end without asking. The other leaned against the side rail and removed his cap. No words exchanged. A courthouse clerk exited the building and placed a folded chair near the bench. She set it quietly, then left it there. It wasn't needed today, but the gesture mattered. The message was clear. This space is held. Another man passed by, briefcase in hand. He didn't stop, but he raised 2 fingers in a silent, informal salute as he walked. The morning continued. The world didn't stop, but something had changed. A new rhythm had taken root. People slowed as they passed. Some offered nods. Others left coffee. A woman placed a folded flag pin on the corner of the bench, just under the plaque. No name attached, just presence. Harry remained still. Nathan beside him, the coffee cooling between their palms. Nothing rushed, nothing missing. The silence held not loneliness, but belonging, not glory, just recognition. And in that ordinary corner of the city, a new ritual had been born, one that would last longer than memory, one built not on what had happened that day, but on who had finally been seen. If stories like this resonate with your heart, like and subscribe for more untold moments of honor and kindness. Let us know where you're watching from, and if this moment brought back memories you carry with you. The best way to honor their memory is to keep listening. Click on the suggested video now, and we'll walk together through another untold chapter of courage and sacrifice.